There it goes.
It's going. All right. Okay. So we have a couple of newish folks. This class is kind of ongoing, and you can come and go as you want. We're just starting on chapter 11, which is Lazarus in John, and it'll become pretty clear to you how this works. But unless generally, this is all about history, culture, and language. So it's basically the translation of John directly from the Greek. You don't have to know Greek, but the Greek that we need to know, you'll get it. Where's the rest of the class? To be honest, usually the place is filled up.
Well, Paul's out.
Oh, Paul's out. That's right. So he didn't bring us the crew, right? Oh, it's all right. Anyway, you don't have to know any Greek. We'll just go over it, and this shows all the work. So that way we can see it, but we'll go through it. The translation, I'm making for you a cultural translation. You see, what's a cultural translation? This is probably good for everybody here again. Anyway, a cultural, you have different types of translations. I put up the NIV because the NIV is what we call that is a modern type translation that tries to put everything within our social modern context. The next one I'll have down after the Greek is the King James. King James is nearly a literal translation, very similar to a literal translation, which still does some cultural changes, but you can see the little bit of differences. In a cultural translation, we translate the words exactly like they are in the original Greek, and we try to understand them within a historical context, which sometimes is helpful, sometimes it's not, because the Greek is very complex. And as we go through, if we go through it, you'll see that, well, I'll explain it as we get to those points. Anyway, so the last one we had was 11:8. The learner's disciples make a logical argument to him. Rabbi, at present, the Judeans were seeking to plot or throw stones at you, and I knew you lead us under in that place, that is to Jerusalem, because they're going to Jerusalem. They're going back towards Jerusalem, and actually Lazarus is dying, and the sisters have asked him to come. We talked a little bit about that, and Jesus makes this comment to them as they're traveling, apparently, or before they went. Here's the NIV. Are there not 12 hours of daylight? Anyone who walks in the daytime will not stumble, for they see by this world's light. This is a saying that is not found in any, that we know of from any other source. It may be Greek, it may be Hebrew, we don't know. It may be just a saying that Jesus is telling us because, as we'll get into, Jesus is a great Greek speaker, great Greek. The Greek that John uses and the Greek that Jesus uses is wonderful in a logical argument to dialogue, to enunciate telos in a dialogue format. And that's what we see. So this statement, we'll look at this statement. Here's the Greek. We can go back and refer to it as we need to, but I have it in a literal with the Greek and the English. Jesus answered, are there not 12 hours in a day? This is the King James. If any man walk in the day, he stumbleth not, because he seeks the light of this world, which is a very interesting statement. What's that?
Seeth the light.
Seeth, yes. Sorry, maybe I said seeketh. This is the words in the Greek. Abikarinthe, he concluded for himself. Many times, you notice they say answered, but the Greek, abikarinthe in Greek, there is another word specifically for just to answer. So this is an example of using a cultural translation. Abikarinthe in Greek means conclude for yourself. In other words, you think about it. Just like in the previous statement, it said the disciples made a logical argument. In Greek, there are more than 10 words for say and said. In every case, when it's brought up, there's phine to make an opinion, or rime to tell a story, or lelo just to talk. Logos means to make a logical argument. In our English, we translate those as say and said. Well, to me, that's crazy head stuff. Why would you translate it to say and said when it means something very specific to a Greek person who's hearing this or reading this? So that's what I mean by cultural translation. So we don't mince, we don't play games. The only time I ever use said is epe. Epe in Greek, epen, means to say or said. It's the past tense, and it means it could be either any of those methods of saying and setting, but it means in the past tense, and that's the only word that can be really translated say or said in Greek. In this case, apkrente is really cool because there are other words in Greek that means they made an immediate response or they immediately reacted, but apkrente means that I thought about it and then I concluded. So it says specifically, he concluded himself, Jesus, no or not, to intent, times and periods whereof there are of the day. In the case that a certain one thing anyone, he treads all around in the Hemera in the day, on or not he strikes or trips, that are because of the phos, a light of the charisma of that which was created, the orderly arrangement of him, does he look at. And so here is the translation. What we do is, this is in the Greek order, so it's not the English order. So I put it into the Greek order. I basically correct the words and I fix the stuff. So it's, if you look, I try and make as few changes as possible between the texts so we can see. Jesus concluded for himself, 2 and 10. And the reason I left it in 2 and 10 because Greek as well as Latin is base 5, not base 10. We're base 10, especially since the algebraic age, since since we've got Arabic numbers. Arabic numbers gave us base 10, but the Greeks and the Romans are base 5. And the way they taste stuff is like, for example, 6 is 5 plus 1. Coolio. And here, 12 is 10 plus 2. 2 5s plus, and the word, of course, the word that's used is specifically 12, dodeca, 2 and 12, means literally 2 and 10. 2 and 10 periods, hours there are, not of the period, day. In Greek, again, hemera means a period or a day. And so, I tried to put that in context so we can see it's not necessarily, it does mean a day in a sense. In the case of someone treads all around into the day, into the period, he strikes not against trips, because the light of that which was created of him does he look like. Now, yes, it sounds a little bit complicated, but the reason that it sounds complicated is, number one, in English, we generally translate cosmo as, let's see, what do they translate cosmo as into the King James? They translate the light of of this world. Let's see if I can go over there and draw the picture. I think I can get up and move around enough to give a picture, see if I can get it. The Greek worldview, which is really critical to us, this is how Jesus and the Greeks are thinking. You have the plenum of everything. The plenum of everything. And within the plenum of everything is the creation, which is called the cosmos. This is the cosmos. This is what was created. Within the cosmos is what the Greeks call the philosophia. This is what man can know. Philosophia, we usually translate meaning to be the love of knowledge. The love, Sophia means of wisdom, but it's a Greek goddess. But we usually translate philosophia to be the love of wisdom, the love of knowledge, but it's not. Philosophia means and I'm not going to get into the details of how to prove this, but it means literally what can be known by human beings. And then there's a thing called the gay. The gay is literally the physical world, the empirical world that you can measure, that you can see. The philosophia are those things which incorporate mathematics, thoughts, mind, emotions, all that stuff. in the Greek, they constantly use the word cosmos. And as you can see, cosmos doesn't mean the world, the gay, what you can perceive, or the philosophia. It incorporates the philosophy and the gay, but it's different. It means literally that which was created. So that's why I use that term. I don't want to re-mess that term too much, although it makes it a little more complicated. And you notice what it says, the cosmos of him, of him. What do you think of him is? Of God, yeah. It's, you know, our translators fix too much for us many times. They pull out words that, yes, they may be extraneous. There's a lot of, in Greek, you'll see a lot. A Greek word is always a, oh, okay, so you got to think about this. It has an indirect article, an a, where when it wants a direct article, they'll put a direct article in. Many times they'll use direct articles, the, right? They'll say, the Jesus. Well, yeah, there's only one Jesus, but it's the Jesus. Because the presumption in Greek is that there's always an a. Yeah, we throw out the Jesus because we don't need a the Jesus. We don't need, you know, in most cases, we don't need a direct article for a person. That's just English. That's what we do. But many times our translators throw out words that they probably shouldn't be throwing out because they have direct connotation to the translation itself. So we've got this really interesting word, and I wanted to specifically look at this word right here, pros and copto. Oh, and I didn't put the top part. For pros and copto, this is pros coptai. He strikes against her trips. It means to strike at, and, you know, he strikes, okay, here's the thing. A certain one treads all around to the period in the day, he strikes not against. And that literally means in Greek to trip. It also means to trick, to stub your toe. Because the light of that which was created of him does he look at. So this, right, if you weren't here in the class before, we had chapter 9 and 10. 9 was the man born blind, and 10 was a continuation of the man born blind. The whole point of the man born blind was there was a guy born blind, Jesus healed him, and there was a huge fight with the Pharisees and the Sadducees, the priests and the Pharisees, about this guy who was born blind, which is a wonderful dialogue. It's a beautiful dialogue. But the end part of that dialogue, the Pharisees of Jesus, it says in the Greek, Jesus' Pharisees asked, well, does that mean we're blind? And the whole of the 10th chapter, the 10th chapter of John, is a dialogue about how, yeah, you're blind. That means us. You're blind. But because you hear the voice of Christ, you hear the voice of the Messiah, and you're his sheep, then it doesn't matter that you're blind. And what this is relating to the future, right? Because right now we don't literally see Christ. We don't physically see him, but we hear his voice. He's convinced us, right? We're convinced. And therefore, there's hope for us, even if we don't see the Messiah. Because, I know it's getting really deep, and I'm trying to, condense this together. But the point of this goes directly back to the previous dialogues. In Greek, it's a logos, a logical argument to an unstated telos. So these logical arguments continue through the whole text. And guess where we see them again? In Lazarus. Because look what Jesus says. This point, continuation of man born blind, the logos to the unstated telos. It's Lazarus as one of Jesus' potential Pharisees, right? I told you before, it looks like Lazarus was probably the rabbi of Bethany. If you're a rabbi, pretty much you're already part of the Pharisee group. We know Jesus is most likely the rabbi of Capernaum. That's pretty obvious from the previous parts of John. So Jesus is affiliated with the Pharisees. And it's not negative. Paul was a Pharisee, right? A Pharisee of Pharisees. So it's just an appellation. It's like you get your card, right? You got your life-saving card. It just says you're a lifesaver. That's a good thing. But, you got your card because you're a rabbi. That's what they expect. I'm just saying. So anyway.
Pharisee Union.
The Pharisee Union. Well, you had the Sadducees, the Pharisees, the Essenes, the Zealots, right? Antin Hodos. So who's your card? And maybe you have multiples. That's really cool. Anyway, this is literally a continuation of this man born blind. Jesus' disciples, those who can see and are not currently blind, it's a double reference to both. In other words, this could be a direct reference, and I think it is a direct reference to the previous part where John is telling us about the Pharisees. Are we blind also? Right? And yet, what's going to happen? We're going to see a revelation, an amazing revelation. And that points to that. There's a third point that the person doesn't trip because it looks that which was created. Okay, I'm not going to go make through the whole discussion about this, but at the beginning of John, it quotes the Septuagint. In the beginning was the Logos, and the Logos was with God, and the Logos was God. Well, the point of that is that in the Septuagint, in the Hebrew, and I'm going to mix it up, with the English, but it says, in the beginning was Elohim, gods, with a singular verb. So it's gods, but it's singular verbs, so which the presumption is Elohim means gods. El is God. In the beginning, Elohim, gods, with a singular verb. So immediately you have what we call it, the thing of the Trinity of three, right? Of multiple. And it says, and the Ruach HaKodesh lay on the water. The HaKodesh, the Ruach, which is the Holy Spirit, basically, the Spirit. And God amarred. The Word of God spoke. Now, in the Septuagint, which is a Greek translation of the Old Testament, it says, in the beginning, Theos, singular, and with Theos, the Ruach HaKodesh, or the Hagios Pneuma, the Pneuma, lay on the waters, and God Logos. That's why John in the beginning writes, in the beginning was the Word. Logos, however, does not mean word in Greek. That is a gross mistranslation. Logos cannot mean word in Greek. Logos means one thing in Greek, and that is a logical argument. It is a dialogue argument. Why we have translated it into logos, I have no idea. That is, what's that? Into word. Into word. I think we have translated it because of the Septuagint, and then the Septuagint refers to the Amar. And so those who are translating, when they fix John, because it literally says the beginning was Theos, God, and God spoke the Logos. So the Logos, the logical argument, which is Christ, is the seed of creation, is what created. So, and I hope I'm not confusing you guys. Some of this is repeat because this is stuff that we continue to build on, but I don't want to leave you dead in the tracks either. So the third point of this is because Jesus is the Logos, according to John, the logical argument, the thing that created the universe. He's talking, every time he talks about the cosmos, it should ring a bell, right? Because he is the creation. He is the Word of God, the Amar, the command word. Amar is in Hebrew is the command word. He is a logical argument that created. And so therefore, it shouldn't be unusual to us that Jesus brings the logical argument to us. That's what his disciples continue to talk about. Yes, sir?
And in the cosmos, as far as the Greeks are concerned, that's where the little g gods live.
Right, right. I'll bring this up because you brought it up. This is, I think, a very important point. Although we have fixed the translations in the New Testament and in the Old Testament, there is a presumption of little g gods all over, everywhere. If you're looking for them, you'll find them like crazy, especially if you're looking at Hebrew and the Greek. When Paul goes to the Athenians, he doesn't tell them your gods are false. Your gods don't exist. He said, yeah, there are all these gods, little g gods living in the cosmos that was created by what? God. by the God. He says, I'm going to tell you about the unknown God. And the reason the unknown God was such a big deal is, anybody know that? Well, I'll tell you them. All the creation myths of the Greeks, where do the gods come from? The Greeks, literally, this is a huge problem for the Greeks, because the Greek gods did not just were not just pre-existent. They were created. The original was Chronos. Chronos, time, was created. Whoa. And Gaia was created. These were the Titans. The Titans were created with the cosmos. And then, you know how we got the Pantheon, right? They were procreated. The only Titan that was left was Hestia, which is really important. We don't care about it in the modern world, but Hestia is very important, because Hestia is the Titan. She was the original goddess of the hearth. And guess what what holiday is named at, what church holy day is named after Hestia? Easter. Whoa! It's not because we worship Hestia, it's because we borrowed the festival of Hestia from the Greeks and took it over, basically, which is really cool. That's what Christianity was doing in the early years, was taking over the Greek festivals. So much so that even today we call the festival of Hestia is Easter, and it's the resurrection of Christ, the recreation of the world, which is amazing. And by the way, I cannot leave this off. The Hestia signs were Alpha and Omega. So every day, if you were Greek, what you did is when you started the fire, you didn't start a fire. The fire was pre-existing. It was in the embers. You restoked the fire. When you restoked the fire, you wrote an alpha on the hearth. When you rebound or when you packed the embers for the next day, you wrote an omega on the hearth, because Hestia was the alpha and omega to the Greeks. In the New Testament, Christ becomes the alpha and the omega. He's borrowing the Greek terminology, which I think is astounding. You know, it's not to say we worship any of these things. It's to say that we have borrowed these as symbols, and they are very important symbols. And guess what? We see them in the Greek all the time. I think it's just really interesting stuff.
It's also kind of ironic that the Greeks had the same who created the gods, and our physicists today have the same. What happened before the Big Bang? Well, the Big Bang had to come from somewhere, and they can't explain it, and the Greeks couldn't explain who created their gods.
I agree 100%. Mary, this is one of the huge differences between they call them creation myths, but there are no creation myths in other religions and other cultures. The only real creation myth exists in Hebraic and Christian culture, because they're the only ones that say in the beginning, God, and God created. In all the other, quote, creation myths, it's not about the creation of the world per se. It may be the development of the world. Like, you know, the gods suddenly became, and then they began building the world. But it's mostly about the human beings being placed on the earth. If you go back and look at most of the creation myths, they're all about human beings being put on the earth, how they came about, which is very interesting. And you can see how that would be, right? Without some kind of revelation, which I think that's what Moses got from God. What would you think about the world? It's eternal. There's no creation, right? Matter of fact, you guys know about the Aether, and about before the Big Bang Theory, what did all of science believe? This is the problem is, we need to go back to the 1920s and look at, I've got a 1920s textbook on astronomy. The presumption of all scientists in the whole world was what they call eternal Earth. There was no creation, the Earth was eternal, That's what they came to. Their ideas they came to in the 1800s, in the age of empiricism. As the age of empiricism grew out of the age of logic and reason, the age of reason became the age of empiricism. The empiricists said the world has to be eternal. There can be no creation. Forget about that stuff you read in the Old Testament. Forget about all that stuff you read. There's no creation. There is just an eternal world. And then what happened? They discovered the Big Bang, which I think, yeah, they started actually studying the cosmos, and what they find, whoa, this is why I think Christians, okay, look, don't buy into all the crazy stuff, but I think the whole idea of the Big Bang Theory, hey, go along with it, because it proves the creation. And it proves God, because what you said is exactly right. There has to be, and the Greeks call it a telic cause. There has to be a cause for the universe. So what's the cause? What's the name? Hawking said it was aliens. Aliens and pre-existing technology, right? Okay.
Same problem.
Where did that come
Where did that come from? Exactly. So anyway, I've got some really cool books on this exact subject that talks about this, because there's amazing conundrums. But anyway, science proves there's God, and that's why I really like this. And if you're fighting logically with people who are, basically empiricists, most empiricists still believe in eternal Earth, because the Big Bang Theory does a horrible thing for them. It makes them have an incredible realization. You have to ask. I always ask them, what's the cause of the universe? Ooh. Anyway, from aliens to pre-existing conditions. I don't know. Here's a 10. It is when a person walks at night that they stumble, for they have no light. What's that?
Unless you're the president.
Uh-oh. But a man who walks at night, he stumbleth, because there is no light in him. In case that, but a certain one or thing, anyone, he treads all around. Peripata is really a cool word. In Greek, it doesn't just mean to walk. It means to tread all around. There's a specific word in Greek that means just to walk. To walk. Treading all around means you're walking around. It doesn't mean you don't have a destination, but it means you're not exactly making a straight track. But it's really an interesting word. To a night, he strikes against prayer. Same word, prospopai. That are because the light or source of light, it is not in him, into him. Let's see what it says. Here's the translation. But in case that if a certain someone treads all around into the night, he strikes against, because the light or a source of light, it is not into him. All right. I got a couple of things to say about this. Number one, Jesus just kind of throws this out, right? And most of the time, people are left hanging. I don't know if many pastors talk about this, because it's like, here they are going, either on their way to Bethany, or they're planning to go to Bethany, and all of a sudden Jesus says, hey, if you're in the daylight, you won't stub your foot. But if you're at night, you can stub your foot. No, he's making a statement. As I said, this goes right back to what we previously had in the man born blind. Because guess who the man born blind is? Those who cannot see the Messiah, right? But the whole point was that if you hear the voice of the Messiah, then you can find your way. Jesus is basically telling him here that in the daylight, in the cosmos, in the creation, it's me, it's Jesus. But when it's night, you notice what he says here. The source of light is not into him. So what is the source of light, according to John from chapter 1? I know if you haven't been here, you wouldn't know the source of light. But you guys, chapter 1, what's the source of light? Jesus, right? The Messiah. And so the source of light, if you have the source of light with you, but Jesus even said more. He said, even if you can't see me, like you're born blind, right? Or you're a Pharisee, are we blind also? if you hear the voice of Christ. So, if you haven't noticed, we moved from light energy to acoustic energy, which is really cool to engineering, but everybody else forgets it, doesn't care much. But we were talking about this before class even. This is a Mysterion statement. All right. I'm not going to go over the whole thing about Mysterion today. At some point, we probably need to, because Mysterions are very important. The Greeks thought, just looking at Christianity and Judaism, by the way, when the Greeks looked at them, they saw a Mysterion. A Mysterion basically is named after the god or the leader. So that's why the Greeks called Christians, which were called Tin Hodos by themselves, Christians in Antioch, because they named it after Christ, because they thought it looked like a Mysterion. Mysterions have a secret, and guess what? Christianity has a secret. Christ has died, Christ has risen, or Christ will come again. Oh, but they told everybody their secret. Mysterions have baptisms. Mysterions have a meal with the deity. Mysterions had a lot of features that looked exactly like Christianity, including, by the way, one of the things that Jewish people do not do is, all right, if I were a Jewish person, if I were a Jewish Tin Hodos in the first century, would I ever do this? Why not? Why wouldn't I do that?
Graven image, basically.
It's a graven image. Yeah. When I do this, never. That is an image. If you remember, it says make no graven image, right? It literally means make no image. And the Hebrew culture thought that any image was bad. But what happened in the Mysterions had their codes. They had code words. They had codes like this, symbols. They had handshakes. Like the Messianic handshake and stuff like that. They had ways of identifying themselves. And because they were not Jewish, they were, Tin Hodos is a sect of Judaism, but when it got into the Greeks kind of made it their own in a way. You had the Hebrew teachers, right? And you had the rabbis, and you had all the Jewish structure. But the Greeks began to borrow, like I said, Paul even told them to do it. When we studied Corinthians, we saw that Paul told them, participate in the festivals, participate in the sacrifices, and do what? Bring Christ into it. That's what he was encouraging them to do, and you see that throughout the New Testament letters. But the big deal is that the symbols were anathema to the Jewish people, but yet we see these symbols used significantly. I should have brought pictures of Ephesus. In Ephesus, there are pictures like this on the cut into the limestone, into the stone near the port area, and you can see the Christian symbols because they think it's where Christians met or got together. So very interesting stuff. Not just to mention too that why do the insides of churches generally look the way they do? They're supposed to be. You heard this? Inside of a boat. Because they believed that early Christians met under boats in general. Oh, and back to Mysterion and the light. Remember when Jesus said, don't hide your light under a bushel? We take that completely out of context. What he's talking about is the Mithrin Mysterion. The Mithrin Mysterion, they hid their light under a bushel, under a basket, and then they went to the ceremony. The ceremonies were in caves underground in the dark, and during a certain part of the ceremony, they would lift the light over from the basket, and everyone would show their light. This is a light, let it shine, right? Guess what? We've incorporated that into our worship, but at the time when Jesus talked about it, what do you think he was warning about? Mithrin worship. We use those symbols today in a very positive way, but generally Okay, don't put your thing over a bushel basket. That might be upsetting to Jesus. But what do? We light the candles, right? To represent Christ and the light of Christ. That comes also directly out of John. What Jesus is saying here is a mysterion idea, because whenever you see and by the way, this is another evidence of the late, we know that John is late gospel, probably about 90 AD. But it shows how the Greek ideas and the Roman ideas, especially the Greek ideas, had come into the church, and I think in a very positive way, come into teen odos. And people were using these to influence the Greeks, influence the Romans, and also, I think, influence us. Because what kind of minds do we have? We have Greek minds. We are Greek thinkers. If you don't know that, we need a Western Civ class again. But, we are Greek thinkers, and Latin, we're even more than Greek thinkers. We are Roman thinkers, Latin thinkers. We write. Okay, you heard this, right? We write in intro, body, and conclusion. I haven't said this in a long time. That's where you're trained to write, in English and in Latin. In Greek, you don't write that way. In Greek, you write in a logos unstated telos, like in Aesop's fable. So just to remind you of the different things and the way we think. However, as Latin thinkers, what's the base of Latin thinking, by the way? The Greeks. I'll put it this way. I think this is absolutely an absolute true fact. I could probably prove it. The Romans wanted to think like the Greeks, but thank God they actually did stuff with their hands, like engineering science. Because the Greeks would talk about building a road, and they used to build roads. They built all the roads, Greek roads. Anybody know where all the Greek roads go? All the Greek roads go to the temple, to their temples. Where did the Roman roads go to?
Colosseum.
Or areas where they want to conquer.
Close. All these roads lead to Rome, but where did the Roman road go to? The temple is right beside the agora, the marketplace. The Romans built their roads to the agora. Why? Commerce. Yeah. All the Greek roads, all the Roman roads go to the agora. All the Greek roads that were built. Well, there is one going to the stadium in Olympia. So they wanted the Olympic Games, which is cool, which that's kind of Colosseum, right? But they built into the temples, which is, I think, very interesting. They didn't build a lot of them, but they built into the temples, where the Romans built their roads to the agora, because the Romans were interested in commerce. And by the way, the Romans built much better roads. How do I know? No, they're still around. But guess what the width of the roads in America are based on? Chariot wheels. And guess what the train tracks are based on? Chariot wheels. Yeah, from the Romans set the standard in 300 BC, and they're still using the same standard today, approximately. Anyway, very interesting. After he set up, he went on to tell them, all right? This is a very interesting exchange. After he said this, he went on to tell them, our friend Lazarus has fallen asleep, but I'm going there to wake him up. And these things said he, and after that he said to them, our friend Lazarus sleepeth, but I go and may wake him up out of sleep. Tauta. Jesus is not quite as clear as this. These here, epen, he said, there's our said, and intercompany with, he makes a logical argument to them, Lazarus, the shield warrior, the philos. Now we translate this friend. I'm gonna repeat this. I know some of you heard this before, but philos, philosophia, does not mean friendship. It means literally the love of a shield warrior. Because in a Beta culture, which this is a Beta culture, Anglo-Saxons are Beta culture, Germans are Beta culture, Romans are Beta culture. Beta culture means you have both. The only article we have left in English that it means two? Both. We used to have a whole, what do you call it? You know how it's I, you, we? There used to be I, beta, two, you, we. The beta was a whole verb tense and a whole way of speaking, because in beta cultures, the most important person that was your bud was your shield warrior. The shield warrior is the guy on the right-hand side that protected your right with a shield. He was not a servant. He was not a slave. He was the one that kept you alive in battle. And the Greeks had shield warriors. That's what phileo means. Sorry, ladies. Now today we could appropriate the term, and you can have your shield sisters, but a shield brother, just like a shield sister, would be someone who protects you with their life. They love you so much, and you love them so much that you're willing to give your life for that person. It's one of the words, by the way, that we use to translate as love. Generally, thrown out like this, we use friendship. But a phileos is literally a shield warrior. It says, a shield warrior of us, he has been put to sleep. And by the way, metei, okay, means, and here I got it out for you, to sleep, fall asleep, or die. From kimei, to put to sleep, to slumber, figuratively to die. So Jesus is not really hiding. He's just using a word that can mean both to die, figuratively, okay. I'll remind you, Greek is super concrete. So if somebody told you this word in Greek, what would you immediately think? He's asleep, right? Because that's what the word primarily means. However, Greek does have can be used euphemistically, although not as often. So yes, we take the first meaning to be asleep, but it also has kind of connotation of death. And it says, he's willing to sleep. Other things, contrariwise, I travel, I transport, there's that word, poromei, in order that I may awaken out of sleep him. Exiphinos. And this is what it says. And here's a translation. And these he said in company with this. He makes a logical argument to them. Lazarus, our shield warrior, has been put to sleep. Contrariwise, I travel in order that I may wake him out of sleep. Exipineso literally means to wake up out of sleep. The disciples replied, if he sleeps, he'll get better. Yeah, right? When you're sick, if you're asleep, you'll get better. Then said the disciples, Lord, if he's asleep, he should do well. They said, certainly accordingly, the learners of him, supreme in authority. He has been put to sleep. He will be safe, rescued. And this is an interesting word. Sosisetea, he will be safe. This is a word that's translated usually saved, to be saved. Accordingly, the learners said of him, Lazarus, supreme authority, if he has been put to sleep, he will be safe. And John tells us, remember, who did I tell you I think the audience of this is? I think I've proven it. Who's the audience? Greeks and Romans, right? So the Greeks and the Romans who are hearing this, the Latin speakers, would immediately think that he meant he's fallen asleep. And Jesus even confirmed. So John makes sure it's clear to the Greek hearers. The Hebrews, would not be quite as slow as the disciples, I don't think, because they would go, he's dead. Yeah. Jesus had been speaking of his death, but his disciples thought he meant natural sleep. I think this is very interesting because, all right, we are our culture. We live within our culture. We are talking about a multicultural society here, a very strongly multicultural. They're speaking Greek. They speak Aramaic, maybe. We're not sure how much Aramaic was really spoken because we don't know. We think that almost everything was Greek. Many of them speak Latin. Well, they'd like to speak Latin, at least some kind of degree of Pig Latin, maybe, some kind of Latin, so they can communicate, right, with the Romans and the authorities. So you have this culture. The disciples are decidedly, they speak Greek. Many of them, most of them have Greek names, but yet they are Hebraic thinkers. The audience to John, I think, are mostly Greek thinkers. So we see John moving in and out culturally, explaining things to his hearers that he would expect them not to fully comprehend or understand. He's also telling us something else about what? The disciples, the learners. These guys, you know, Jesus didn't go around and pick the brightest of the bunch. Maybe that's good for us, right? He obviously picked Hebraic learners, which is a really interesting thing. Yet, most of them had Greek names, which means they probably spoke Greek really well. They were Greek thinking to a certain degree, right? But apparently not enough, which I think should point to us that our biggest hope is to learn to figure out more of this Greek thinking, because it would probably help us a lot, especially understanding God and Jesus, because I think Jesus and God are Greek thinkers. They happen to use everything else they have in their hands, right? They use whatever they have, but they're trying to get us to think logically and rationally about things. And that's, I think it's very important, but whatever. How many just spoke of his death? He thought he had spoken of taking a rest and sleep. He had poured for thee, uttered. This is a word for speaking. Ekrikia, he had poured for the uttered. But Jesus threw all over of the death of him, of that one there, that is of Lazarus. They formed an opinion. Look, ex dozen. They formed an opinion. That is because through all over of the reposing, taking rest of sleep, he makes a logical argument. Because they thought Jesus was logically arguing about sleep. But Jesus had poured forth through all over of his death, of that one there, that means of Lazarus. But they formed an opinion because he makes a logical argument through all over of the reposing of the sleep. Do you see how this is a direct to the Greek audience? This is like an aside. It is. It's an aside to the Greek audience to explain to them what Jesus is doing. Jesus himself is moving culturally. He's moving between cultures, which means that we need to kind of think in that way, I think, a little bit. There's a really important part I want to get into right here. So then he told them plainly, Lazarus is dead. And Jesus said to them plainly. Okay? They win, certainly accordingly, he said to them. He said to them, the Jesus, Parisia, in all outspokenness, Lazarus Apathaean has died off. Now, this gives me an opportunity to again say something very important in this context. Accordingly, the when Jesus said to them, to all outspokenness, Lazarus, he has died off. All right. This shows a lot of really interesting stuff, both about the Greek culture and the Hebrew culture, and also about the author and how he's expressing it about Jesus. And we're going to see another word that I think is very important. But you notice that Jesus, you notice there, how many ways have we already seen to say that you could die, right? There are more. This is the most crass and the most straightforward way of saying it, pretty much, to die off. This is the word used when they talk about killing, like killing Jesus or killing, people. But yet, it is considered really crass. It's kind of like, how do we use euphemisms? They passed away. They went to sleep. They went to a better place, right? We have
with the fishes.
some of the fishes. We have, English has more euphemisms. English is not the most euphemistic language, but it's pretty close. But we have more euphemisms, and we make them up every day, right? We make new ones. You see them in the press even though somebody will come out with some new euphemism or new way of saying something that they don't really want to say, right? But yet we have words. We have 1 million words. We have 1 million ways of saying things. And many times to say the same thing, we have lots of words. And then we have words like love, where in the Greek, there's 10 different words that they use. But in English, we got one. Oh, but we make them, we put clauses, we add stuff to them, we put, adverbs and, because love is a noun and a verb. So we can do everything with it, right? Do you know that love, okay, I'm going to just do this. I got to toss this out because it's very important. Do you know the word love cannot exist without a written language? There is no such thing as love without a written language because it's not a noun I can draw a picture of. It's not a verb I can draw a picture of. I can't demonstrate it to you. I can show you some actions, but that's not love, right? Not in any context we know. The Greeks can do it very well because they have words, but we don't. Well, we do. They're probably technical and not word speaking. But anyway, I'm just saying, it's very interesting how in English we have so many ways of saying things. The Greeks do too, but they usually do it with words specifically. And for your sake, I am glad I was not there so that you may believe. Well, let's go to it. Right? And I am glad for your sakes I was not there, for the intent you may believe. Nevertheless, let's go to it. Here's what it says in the Greek. And chario. Chario. That is a very important word. When the angel came to Mary, he said, chario. Said, chario is a greeting. Greeting. Chario, but it means graciousness. It's a word we translate as grace. Chario. I delight in graciousness, through you, in order that you are convinced. Believe is pisteo. Faith is pistis. So you are convinced. Though there is no word for believe or faith in Greek. The only word we have is pistis and pisteo. Pistis means to be convinced, and pistis means that you are convinced. Of that because you are not, I was in that place. Other things, let us lead forward to him. Very clear statement. And I delight in graciousness. Though you, in order that you are convinced of logical argument, because I was not in that place, contrariwise, let us lead forward to him. So, this is really interesting. I delight in graciousness, our word grace. Then Thomas, known as Didymus, said to the rest of the disciples, let us also go that we may die with him. This is an interesting one to try to dig out. This is Thomas, which is called Didymus, into his fellow disciples. Let us also go that we may die with him. He said, Epic, certainly correlate, Thomas, he about whom was made a logical argument, Didymus the twin, to the Simatheus, two together with learners, Simatheus, the together disciples. Let us lead Egomen, Hamas, us, in order that we may die off in company of him. Accordingly, Thomas, he about whom was made a logical argument, the twin, said to the together with learners, let us lead in order that we may die off in company with him. All right.
Which him are they talking?
Yeah. All right, now, you got to realize the logos, the beginning of this logos, the logical argument was they're on the opposite side of the Jordan River, right where John the Immerser was immersing. They're kind of hiding out because what do the Judeans want to do to Jesus? They want to stone him, right? Yeah, they want to stone him, but that's equivalent to kill him. They want to kill him. Apokadesta. They want him to die off. So they're going to kill him. And what was Jesus said, let's go see Lazarus. And the disciples said,
No, they're trying to kill you there.
Yeah, why do you want to go there? That's where they want to stone you, listrate you. You know, they want to throw stones at you. This is badness. Let's not do that. So what does Thomas conclude? What's the unstated tell us?
If we're going there, we're gonna die.
If we're going there, we're going to die. That's right. If we're going, we're going to die. Because Lazarus, now, all right, I want you to see this. This is very important. Because this is the tie, right? Remember, in our ancient documents, they're not telling us all the stuff we want to know. We want to know everything. We want to know the cloud cover. We want to know how sunshiny it is. We want to know the temperature. We want to know what they're wearing, right? They're all got Haitian on. Don't worry about it. They want to know all this stuff. But guess what? They've only got so many words to tell us, and they're telling us the best they can. Remember, I told you that it appears from before the previous argument that at the very least, Lazarus is one of Jesus' Pharisees. At the very least. But yet he is also a shield brother. He's very important in Bethany. We're going to see how important he is in Bethany. This is huge stuff. So, why do you think, okay, they're going to see Lazarus. Lazarus is dead. He's their shield brother. He's Pharisee. He's probably the rabbi of Bethany. So therefore, and by the way, who's protecting Jesus? I kind of like the Chosen. The Chosen's got, sometimes you're on a little off track, a little of their backstory. I guess it's okay. They're holding mostly to the line. I think it's kind of interesting. But who's protecting Jesus according to them, which I think is right on the money? Nicodemus. In Jerusalem, Nicodemus is protecting, and the political rivalry, they're kind of trying to play the political rivalry, which I think is really true. There's a lot of that going on. But old Nicodemus, a Pharisee, is protecting Jesus politically. And, we hear about Nicodemus in the 3rd chapter of John, and it's wonderful, right? About Pneuma and the whole 9 yards, which is really cool stuff. But now we have, who's protecting Jesus? If Lazarus is a Pharisee and the rabbi of Bethany, who's protecting Jesus? Probably Lazarus, right? And we're going to find out how rich he is. He's really a wealthy dude. Very interesting connections here. So Thomas is basically saying what we should be thinking. If Lazarus is dead and we're going to Bethany, nobody's going to protect us. Who's going to take care of us, right? This is that Greek with the unstated logos to tell us. There's a lot of stuff going on here. Is all connected to the previous, accounts about Jesus. I got twin, interesting about statement. It's an inanity in Hebrew thought. It's like Thomas is calling on them to be martyrs, which is not happening at all. About the field lawyer deeply embedded in the Greek worldview, a Roman staple, the perfect warrior, the perfect man is willing to die for his shieldmate. So we have Thomas, the twin, calling the others to die with their shield warrior. Not very far off, but great. And I need to add the statement also about the other part here. Thomas means what he says, and he doesn't get it at all. His presumption is Lazarus is dead, and that's it. And the pronouncement is a setup that John is giving us. John is setting us up. He's giving us the name, the twin. He's reminding us Thomas is speaking for the other disciples. He tells the Greek and the Roman learners that the gospel that Thomas means the twin. This puts the inscribing in the context of the Greek worldview in the statement of a twin that we might ask, the twin together with the learners. In other words, because Thomas is a twin, that's really akin to the whole concept of a shield warrior, right? You're twins. You're bound in life because you were bound in the womb. Oh, brothers of the same womb, Adiphos, right? Siblings of the same womb. Thomas is saying they're going to die together with Lazarus. I mean, that's what Jesus is to them is implying. Because that, by the way, is not the Hebrew worldview per se, right? Hebrew worldview doesn't really incorporate this. They're not Beta culture. But the Greek worldview does. And you got to connect all this together. I know it's kind of difficult, but the fact that John calls him the twin, he reminds us of that. He talks about the disciples, Matthias Sympatico, together, disciples. He's saying that Thomas is speaking for the disciples, basically, and saying, hey, we're going to go die with Lazarus. We're going to die with Jesus. Let's go, brothers, right? We'll be like shield warriors. We'll be really cool. Okay, we're going to see what really happens. But I think this is a great place to break. Thank you, Lord, for your word. I pray you look at us this week. In your name we pray. Did it stop?
I don't see it. Oh, no, it's still flashing.
Oh, no.